What if the Honourable Lord Eddard Stark, long thought to be a relic of honour in a dishonourable world, never truly died? What if, in the stillness before his execution, as the sword of Sir Ilan Payne rose above the sept of Baelor, something far older than justice or death intervened? What if Bran Stark, still discovering the vast, terrifying depths of his greenseer powers, unknowingly opened a door and pulled his father through time itself? The crowd never noticed. To them the sword fell, the head rolled, and Joffrey smirked. But in that instant, in the heartbeat between breath and blood, Bran's scream echoed across time. Sitting by the heart tree in Winterfell, eyes rolled back, veins throbbing, Bran's connection to the weirwood net surged uncontrollably. He hadn't meant to do anything, only to watch. But emotions override intent, and his desperation had opened a crack in time. That crack widened. Ned Stark awoke not to darkness but to snow. He was standing, whole, unbroken, and very much alive, in the middle of a weirwood grove unlike any he had ever seen. The trees whispered, not just in wind but in thought. Their leaves rustled with memories not his own. Confusion overwhelmed him at first, but then something deeper stirred. The presence of the old gods. They were not gods of mercy, but of time, memory, and consequence. And they had chosen him. He wasn't alone. Her figure stepped forward, cloaked in green and white, face shadowed but young, Bran or a version of him. Older, eyes ancient, body both human and spectral. "Father," the boy said with a voice laced with centuries, "I'm sorry. I couldn't save you the right way, but I pulled you here. You're not just needed, you're necessary." Ned said nothing. His instincts screamed to run, to fight, to deny, but his Stark blood had always run colder than fear. He asked simply, where is here? "Between moments," Bran replied, "outside the line of time. You're in the roots of the world now, and we don't have long." Memories began flooding back into Ned's mind, not his own but others. Aerys burning the Starks, Robert's rebellion, Jaime's betrayal, the Targaryen massacre. Then further still, the long night, the first men, the pact with the children, the rise of the others. Every image burned into his soul. He dropped to his knees, breath stolen by visions. Bran knelt beside him. "This is the truth, Father. The war isn't about thrones. It never was. It's about time-breaking. Again." In the waking world, Bran lay comatose. But here, in the space between seconds, he trained his father. Not with weapons, but with truths. Ned learned how the past could be watched, even whispered into. He watched Lyanna die. Watched Benjen ride into the cold. Watched himself hold Jon Snow, not his bastard, but his nephew. The lie he swore to protect suddenly felt small next to the vastness of what was coming. He saw visions of the Night King, not just the creature of death, but a curse from the first broken promises. The children of the forest had created him, but man's sins fed him. And he would return again and again if the loop wasn't closed. Ned understood then why Bran brought him. Honor was not just a word. It was a fixed point, unchanging, steady, and time, wounded and twisted by treachery and ambition, needed a guardian like that. Someone who wouldn't bend the past to suit the present. Someone who could walk through moments without corrupting them. Training took no time because time no longer mattered. Every lesson was a vision. Every truth was a wound. Ned relived his life not as a man but as an observer. And when it ended, Bran said only, "Now you must go back. But not all of you." Ned's body returned to the moment before the axe, but this time he stepped to the side. Ilan Payne's sword struck air. Gasps rose from the crowd. Ned was gone again, but not to them. To the world he had died. And in truth, part of him had. The man was no longer flesh. He was a fragmentum, a whisper. Their guardian walking unseen across time, through dreams, through history, fixing the broken lines that would unravel the realm. He walked among the weirwoods. He whispered to young Theon in Winterfell's Godswood, a soft voice urging him to remember loyalty. He nudged Maester Luwin to read a certain scroll twice. He stood beside Catelyn as she prayed, his spirit aching with love he could never express again. But he wasn't just a ghost. He was action. He altered nothing directly, but ensured that truth reached those who needed it. He whispered to Sam in the library at the Citadel, guiding his hand to the right page. He reached Arya in her dreams, placing needle in her hand before she ever woke with the idea to find it again. He warned Jon in his sleep, "The wall isn't just stone. It's a seal. And yet the power came with a price. Every time he moved through time, he lost a piece of himself. The past was heavy, and the old gods, though wise, were not kind. They demanded sacrifice. The more Ned saw, the burning of Harrenhal, the horrors beyond the wall, the betrayal of Jon Connington, the more silent he became. Bran, still tethered to the world of the living, tried to call to him. But Ned no longer answered in words, only in ripples. In Winterfell, during the Battle of the Bastards, Jon stood surrounded. Arrows rained, shields closed, and then a gust of wind. Ramsay's arrow missed. The signal horn sounded too soon. Small, impossible error. One that saved Jon's life. Ghosts don't bleed, but they do guide. Time, however, was fraying. Too many ripples, too many wounds. The Night King had learned of the interference. He too was tied to time, but through death. If Bran and Ned could guard the living threads, the Night King sought to sever them forever. And he had begun hunting Ned, not his body, but his memory. In dreams, Ned saw icy eyes watching him through the weirwood leaves, shadows freezing the past into stillness, moments becoming brittle. Bran warned him. The Night King was moving back, not forward, trying to erase the very hope Ned had restored. And so Ned Stark, Warden of the Past, had to do something unthinkable. He had to go further than any man ever had, to the first pact, to the very moment when man and child of the forest shook hands drenched in blood and snow. There he would try to seal time again. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed another anchor, someone still alive, someone tied to truth and loss. And that someone was Jon Snow. But Jon didn't know it yet. Snow blew wild across the cliffs of Dragonstone as Jon stood alone near the edge, the sea below raging like it shared his unrest. The war was over. Daenerys was dead. Drogon had vanished into the skies with her lifeless body clutched in claws. King's Landing lay in ashes and silence. Tyrion was imprisoned. The Iron Throne, once forged in dragonfire, had melted into a steaming puddle of molten steel and broken dreams. And Jon had no answers, only ghosts. But that night, under the strange stillness of a moonless sky, something called to him. Not with a voice, but a presence. In the silence between waves and wind, he heard a whisper, cold, familiar, and ancient. The past needs you. He turned, blade instinctively ready, but no one was there. Only shadows. Only memory. Back in Winterfell, Bran stirred. The boy turned raven, now king, sat in his wheeled chair in the godswood, alone beneath the heart tree. His eyes went white. And far beyond, within the tangled roots of time, a storm was beginning. Ned Stark moved through the past like a phantom. He no longer walked in a straight line. He drifted through moments. He stood unseen at Lyanna's bedside again, the scent of blood and snow thick in the air. He watched her die again, but this time he didn't mourn. He studied. The moment she whispered, "His name is Aegon," he leaned in closer, deeper into the vision, and that's when he felt it, the rip in time, faint but growing, just behind the curtain of that memory. The Night King had touched this moment. It had changed. The light was colder than before, the shadows sharper. Lyanna's final breath lingered a beat too long, unnatural, as if time was holding its breath. Ned pulled away. Back in the space between time, Bran was waiting. "He's erasing the bloodlines," Bran said. "Not killing, unmaking, starting with Jon." Ned's face didn't change. "Then we stop him." Bran looked weary, far older than his years. "We can't, not like this. I can only see so far, but you're tethered by honor. That's stronger than memory. We need Jon, but Jon wasn't ready, not yet. That night Jon dreamed again. Not of war or fire, but of Winterfell. Not the real one, but a twisted memory. The godswood was dying. Weirwoods blackened, roots rotting, blood dripping from leaves. In the center stood Ned Stark, not as he was in life, but cloaked in white mist, eyes glowing dim red like the trees themselves. He didn't speak. He only pointed. Jon turned to follow his gesture and saw a corridor of ice stretching into nothing. A whisper drifted through the dream. Protect the moment. He woke with a jolt, breath ragged, heart pounding, and suddenly he remembered something he'd never seen. Lyanna's voice, her words, the name, Aegon. He whispered it, and the room chilled. Miles away, Samwell Tarly flipped through scrolls in the Citadel, desperate for distractions from the politics of rebuilding. His fingers landed on a record, brittle and nearly faded. A pact between the first men and the children of the forest. Not the version known by lawmasters, but older. The ink shimmered faintly, runes only visible under moonlight. Sam squinted. The moment must hold. The bloodline must remain. The guardian must walk unseen. He blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. Then the candle beside him flickered, and a face appeared in the flame for a single heartbeat. Stern, bearded, with eyes heavy from bearing too much. Ned? The flame sputtered out. In the far north, Bran spoke again to Ned through the roots of time. You must anchor the first moment, but he must trigger it, Ned nodded. He doesn't believe in fate. He doesn't have to, Bran said. Only in blood. And so Jon Snow began to see the signs. The raven on the battlements that wouldn't leave. The way Ghost growled at shadows no one else saw. Arya's sudden mention of their father in her sleep, whispering strange phrases she'd never heard before. A name carved into the snow outside his door, Aegon, but melting before anyone else could see it. He tried to brush it off. The war was over. He had been sent to the wall again, a prisoner cloaked in duty. But nothing was normal at Castle Black, not anymore. The winds had changed. The trees whispered. And Jon could feel it. The wall itself was waking. He climbed to the highest tower that night, hoping for clarity, and there he found a single red leaf resting on the stone. A weirwood leaf. Impossible. The closest godswood was leagues away. He bent to pick it up, and time shattered. Jon fell, not physically but spiritually, through visions. Ned standing beside a young Benjen, both boys under the heart tree. Catelyn weeping silently in the great hall. Robb raising his sword in a doomed oath. Arya laughing, tiny, sword in hand. Then fire, then snow, then Bran's voice. Remember who you are, and remember who you were never meant to be. And suddenly Jon stood in the same grove where Ned had first awoken after Baelor's steps, the world between time. Bran stood beside him, not the boy king but the three-eyed raven, and Ned Stark stepped from the trees. Jon stepped back, breath stolen. This is impossible. It has to be, Ned replied. Jon's voice cracked. Are you real? As real as memory, and memory is everything. Bran laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. You are the last blood. The final moment. If the Night King erases you, the cycle breaks. The future collapses. The past fractures. Jon struggled to understand. Why me? Ned looked into his son's eyes. Because you're not just a man. You're a story. The story that changes everything. Bran turned. He's coming. We have to move. The Night King wasn't walking through time. He was consuming it. Each moment he touched froze. Each memory became brittle and cracked. He had learned how to unmake. Not just people, but decisions, legacies, truths. And now he was coming for the first pact. If he destroyed it, the magic would fade. The wall would fall. The weirwoods would rot. And the long night would never end. Jon and Ned ran through memories. Past Winterfell, past Harrenhal, past the Tower of Joy. Their bodies flickering like flames in the wind. They weren't just traveling through time. They were protecting it. Each step a defense. Each memory a battleground. And behind them, the ice grew closer. Jon finally understood. He wasn't just the heir to the throne. He was the last chapter of a book written in blood. And if he failed, that book would be burned. But in the end, even fire bends to time. The snow had stopped falling in the memory of the first pact. The air stood still, frozen in reverence. Ned and Jon emerged into that sacred moment, not as intruders, but as shadows meant to witness and defend. Before them, the first men stood across from the children of the forest, ancient, elemental, and furious. Blood stained the roots of the weirwood tree between them. A pact was being made not with peace, but with necessity. It was the moment the world changed, and now it was under attack. Jon could feel it the moment they arrived. The air trembled. The roots beneath the snow moaned with tension. Something was wrong, not with the memory, but with the foundation of it, a fracture in the magic that bound this moment to reality. Ned stepped forward and placed his hand against the heart tree. The bark shivered beneath his touch. It's already started, he said. Jon looked around. Where is he? Everywhere, Bran said, appearing behind them, but not yet whole. The Night King had not arrived as a man, nor even as a figure. He was entering through corruption, rot in the roots, cold in the air, silence in the oaths being spoken. The pact was fading, the ancient agreement becoming blurred. If it was lost, the divide between the living and the dead would collapse. Bran turned to Jon. "You need to speak the words again." Jon's brow furrowed. "What words?" Bran looked him dead in the eye. "The words of the pact. They're buried in your blood." Jon shook his head. "I don't know them. You don't need to. Your blood remembers. Say what feels true." Ned watched his son, no, his nephew, take a breath, step forward and speak. "I stand for the living. I kneel for the truth. I swear in ice and fire to hold the line. No crown, no coin, only the realm." The weirwood glowed, but then silence cracked. A tear opened behind the tree. Not physical, not visible to most, but Jon and Ned felt it in their bones. The Night King had arrived. He did not walk like a man. He moved like decay, the erosion of time, the forgetting of things. Wherever his presence touched, the roots died. The faces in the weirwood wept black sap. The figures of the first men and the children froze mid-oath, their mouths open but mute. Jon stood between the Night King and the tree. "You can't have this moment." The Night King didn't speak. He never needed to. His intention was ice, absolute, inevitable. He raised a hand and the snow itself hissed in pain. Ned stepped beside Jon. "He doesn't need to kill us. He only needs to silence this." Bran's voice echoed through the trees. "You must hold the memory." Jon gritted his teeth. "Then we fight." But this wasn't a battle of swords. The Night King surged forward and Jon was thrown into another memory, ripped from the grove and dropped into the snows of Hardhome. Screaming fire, death. He was there again, but something was wrong. This wasn't the real memory. In this version, Jon never escaped. The whites overran the boats. Tormund was torn apart. The Night King had changed the outcome. Jon fell to his knees. It felt real, too real. The cold was inside his lungs. Then a voice cut through the horror. "Not your truth." Ned Jon blinked and the fake memory shattered. He stood again in the packed grove. Blood leaked from his nose, but the tree still glowed. Ned held the line. Every time the Night King pushed, Ned stood like the wall itself, immovable, silent, rooted. But the enemy was learning. The next strike was not at Jon. It was at Ned. The Night King threw him into his greatest failure. He stood again in the Red Keep's dungeons. Varys' whisper still ringing in his ears. The moment before he confessed a lie to save Sansa. The moment he bent the knee to a monster king. The moment he compromised everything he was. "I was weak," Ned whispered. "No," came Bran's voice echoing through the moment. "You were human." The Night King twisted the vision. Catelyn appeared, bleeding from the throat. Robb's body, stabbed and cold. Each memory reformed into blame, guilt, paralyzing grief. But Ned, after a lifetime of carrying honor like a burden, understood something most never did. Grief is not weakness, it's proof of truth. He stood taller. "I remember everything," he said, "and I stand for it." And the memory broke. The Night King reeled. The tree glowed brighter. But it wasn't enough. The Night King screamed, not sound, but a pressure that bent time itself. The snow melted backward. The pact began to unravel. The children vanished, their forms cracking like glass. Bran fell to his knees. "We're losing it." And Jon remembered not just his life, his bloodline. He saw Rhaegar weeping beside Lyanna, saw Aemon Targaryen in the citadel whispering of destiny, saw the Mad King's final moments, saw fire and blood dance through the halls of the Red Keep. And then he saw himself, not as Jon Snow, as Aegon Targaryen, but not a king, a thread, a bridge, the past tied to the present, the song of ice and fire. He turned to the Night King, bleeding time from every pore, and spoke not to him, but to the weirwood. "I am the last son of the pact, born of fire, raised in snow. Memory is my sword, truth is my shield. I remember." And the light exploded. The roots lit up like veins across the world. Every godswood ignited. Every weirwood face bled light instead of sap. The pact reforged. The Night King shrieked and shattered, not in body but in presence, unmade again. Bran collapsed. Ned fell to one knee. Jon stood alone before the tree, and time was still but not safe, because this victory wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something worse, because now someone else was watching, and this time it wasn't the Night King, it was someone older. The real enemy had seen the light. The real enemy had seen the light. The light that burst from the godswood did not stay confined to the moment of the first pact. It raced through every thread of time, binding past, present, and future with a blinding clarity. For a few seconds all was one. Maesters at their scrolls paused, as visions not their own flashed before their eyes. Wildlings in the far north woke screaming from dreams of fire and snow. Even Drogon, lost in the skies beyond Valyria, let out a roar that echoed across oceans. Time itself had screamed, and it had been heard. But light, when revealed, casts shadows, and something far more ancient than the Night King had stirred. Jon fell forward, clutching his chest. The light was gone, but it had left a burn, not on his skin but deeper, a mark woven into his very blood. The weirwood tree before him stood whole again, glowing faintly, but the faces within the bark now stared, watching, expecting. Bran looked shaken, sweat on his brow, voice low. "We reforged the pact, but we didn't seal it." Ned helped Jon to his feet, silent and steady. "What else must we do?" Bran's eyes flicked white. When he returned, they were wide with fear. "We're not alone anymore." The ground shuddered. Not from the Night King, he was gone, dissolved like frost under fire. This tremor was deeper, older. A thing that hadn't moved in thousands of years now awakened. Jon caught his breath. "If the Night King wasn't the end..." Bran nodded. "He was the gatekeeper." Ned turned, scanning the grove. "Then what lies beyond the gate?" Bran's voice trembled. "The one who wrote the song. It began with the trees. Weirwoods across Westeros began to bleed. The red sap that once trickled in silence now poured thick and fast, soaking roots and soil. The old gods, if that's what they truly were no longer passive. They were responding to something. Or someone. In Valyria, hidden in the cracked bones of dead dragons, a rune long buried began to glow. At the wall, the black stone at the base groaned as if alive. The pact had been repaired, but that pact had once bound more than just men and children. It had locked something away, and now it was waking. Bran turned to Jon. "There's one place older than the first pact." Jon's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Bran hesitated. "The Isle of Faces." Ned's breath caught. Long ago the Green Men had protected that sacred place, where the weirwoods grew in twisted groves, untouched by war, unseen by man. It was where the trees first spoke, and where the original agreement between something far older and the children was struck. Bran's eyes rolled back as he reached through time, searching. His voice came hollow and distant. "Something is guarding the Isle. Not just memories, not just roots. Something trapped." He came back with a gasp. "It wants to speak to you." "To me?" Jon asked. Bran didn't blink. "To the one who carries fire in his blood and snow in his bones," without another word. The three of them, Bran in his form of thought, Ned in memory, and Jon in flesh, reached for the weirwood roots, and the world vanished again. When they arrived, the Isle of Faces was not what Jon expected. It was quiet, yes, but not peaceful. The trees were warped with age, their faces more detailed than any others in Westeros. Some wept, others screamed. A few had no faces at all, only black voids, and at the center stood a tree larger than any they had ever seen. Its bark was scorched, yet its leaves were a deeper red than blood. It pulsed like it had veins. And beneath it, a figure, not a man, not a child, not even a ghost. It was the author of the pact. Not someone who had signed it, but someone who had written the rules time now obeyed. The figure looked like shadow clothed in bark, its eyes glowing with white fire. When it spoke, its voice was 1,000 whispers. "You opened the seal," Jon stepped forward, cautious. "We reforged the pact. The Night King, the being cut him off. The Night King was a soldier. A failed one. You've now drawn the attention of the true weavers." Ned clenched his fists. "Then speak plainly." The being turned. "Do you think time serves only the living? That memory is only yours to protect? There are others, forgotten, buried in ice and earth, and now..." Awake. Jon felt it, a pull like his blood was being called somewhere. He stepped closer. "Then what happens now?" The tree being extended a hand. In it, a seed. A weirwood seed, black instead of white. "You must plant this," it said. "In the ruins of Valyria," Bran gasped. "That would wake every sleeping fire." "It must be done," the being replied. "Only fire can fight what's coming." Ned looked to Jon. "This is no longer about the throne, or even the North." "No," Bran agreed. This is about the beginning of time. But as Jon reached for the seed, the air cracked. Not wind, not thunder. A scream. From the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked in dark ice, eyes burning green instead of blue. A new enemy. Not the Night King, something worse, the Time Wraith, a being sent to correct what had been over-corrected, a servant of time itself, but no longer bound by the laws of man or God. Where the Night King sought death, the Time Wraith sought unmaking. It moved fast, too fast. Bran collapsed. Ned turned, his form flickering, and Jon faced it. Sword drawn, the Wraith spoke. "You are an error," Jon braced. "Then let's see how well you handle a mistake." Steel met shadow. Memory met void. The grove exploded into chaos. The Wraith didn't bleed. It absorbed. Every strike Jon made only weakened the world around them. The trees faded. The colors dulled. Time began to slip. But just before Jon faltered, a hand grabbed his wrist. "Ned, hold fast," and together, father and son fought. Not for glory, not for power, for memory, for the very fabric of Westeros. And as Bran crawled to the tree, placing a hand upon the bark, the vision flared again. He sent one final message to the waking world. If Jon dies here, he dies everywhere. Then darkness closed in, and somewhere in a cave beyond time, a dragon opened one eye. Fire was returning, but so was the void. The air around them fractured like broken glass suspended in time. Every swing of Jon's sword tore into the void, but not into the Wraith. The blade passed through its form, never landing true. This enemy, this Time Wraith, wasn't made of flesh. It was forged from regret, from ruptured timelines and unfinished oaths. It spoke in echoes of lost moments. Its voice distorted as though it had swallowed centuries. Every word it said cracked something ancient. "You stole the moment," the Wraith hissed, flickering in and out of existence like a stutter in a memory. It was meant to end. Ned Stark was meant to die. The pact was meant to fade. You were never meant to be. Jon gritted his teeth, heart pounding not from fear but fury. Then we were meant to fight. The Wraith raised a limb like a blade, and time around Jon warped. Suddenly he was back at the wall, but it wasn't the past. It was a decayed version of the future. The wall shattered. The ground blackened. The sky burning green. He turned and saw Sam, face frozen in horror, burned into ash mid-scream. Then Arya, limp and bloodied at his feet. He stumbled back. This wasn't memory. It was a warning, a punishment. The Wraith was trying to break his will by showing him what could be. But Jon clenched his fists, forced himself to see past it. He shut his eyes and heard Ned's voice, not behind him but within him. "Truth doesn't bend, Jon, not even to fear." He roared and drove Longclaw through the illusion. Light erupted and the scene shattered. Jon emerged back in the grove, gasping. Bran lay barely conscious, his hand still pressed to the weirwood tree, his voice a thin whisper. The Wraith. "It's bound to one moment. Break that moment, you break it." Ned turned sharply. "Which moment?" Bran's eyelids fluttered. "The beginning of the lie. The first lie told to protect the world. Jon knew then, the Tower of Joy, the lie Ned told to protect Jon. The lie that made him a Snow instead of a Targaryen. That singular, world-altering decision had created a wound in time. The Wraith had crawled through it, feeding on it. And now they had to go back and face it. Without warning, the three of them were ripped through time again. No control, no consent. The Wraith had learned their intent and dragged them there first, warping the scene. They stood once again outside the Tower of Joy, but it wasn't right. The sun was bleeding black. The stone tower cracked like it had been burning from the inside. Sir Arthur Dayne still fought, but endlessly. A loop of his death and resurrection. The Kingsguard fell, rose, and fell again. Ned ran to his past self, who was locked in the cycle, reliving his greatest shame over and over, lying. Jon stared into the tower. Lyanna's scream echoed again and again, but it never ended. The child never came. Time had been stalled. The Wraith stood at the doorway, feeding. "This is the wound," it whispered, "and it will bleed forever." Ned's voice thundered. "No, I made that choice. I'll face it." He stepped forward, and the past version of himself looked up, tired, broken, holding a child he never wanted the world to know. The two Neds locked eyes. It was the first and only time the past met the present directly. "You lied for love," the younger Ned whispered. "For duty." "And I never forgave myself," said the one who had walked through time. The child in his arms, baby Jon, opened his eyes. But instead of innocence, there was flickering flame. A sign of who he truly was. The wraith screamed, twisting the tower further. "If you unmake the lie, the world burns." "No," Jon said, stepping forward. "If we hide truth, the world dies cold." He reached out and touched the infant's forehead, and the truth unfolded. Lyanna's voice echoed one last time, clear, true, unbroken. "His name is Aegon. Let the world know." The tower shook. The loop broke. Arthur Dayne's sword finally fell still. The wraith staggered back, its form unraveling. Without the loop, without the wound, it could not hold, but it wasn't done yet. Its final act was desperation. It lunged toward Jon, trying to possess the man who had defied fate twice. It pierced into his chest, burning like frozen fire, whispering with voices from every lost timeline. Jon screamed. Bran yelled, "Don't fight it! Burn it!" And Jon did. He closed his eyes, reached inward, and called it the fire in his blood. The dragon he never wanted to be, and it answered. Flames erupted from within, not just heat, but truth, a fire that had no name, born from both Targaryen madness and Stark honor. The wraith writhed as it burned, its body collapsing into ash, time stabilizing around them. The Tower of Joy returned to normal, painful, sacred, and now finally, whole. Silence fell. The wind blew softly. Bran breathed again. Ned stood still, hand on his own shoulder, finally forgiving himself. Jon stepped outside, the sun rising, truly rising, over the mountains. Not metaphor, not memory, light, real light. Bran approached him. "The moment is sealed. The wraith is gone, and the lie is undone." Jon nodded but said nothing. Ned stepped forward. "What now?" Bran looked beyond them both, into the tree line. "Now we return." But everything has changed, and it had. The Godswoods were no longer bleeding. The past was no longer cracking. The world had been stitched back together, stronger perhaps, but more vulnerable now that it had remembered its scars. But just before they stepped into the light, Bran turned. "There's one more thing." Jon raised an eyebrow. Bran pointed to the seed. "The black weirwood. You still have to plant it." Jon clenched his jaw. "Valyria." Bran's voice turned grave. "That seed wasn't made to grow. It was made to warn." Ned finally understood. "Then planting it will awaken everything we buried." Bran nodded. "And some of it shouldn't stay asleep." The world was healing, but beneath the stone something ancient had stirred, and fire would not be enough. Not anymore. Not anymore.